Not that it's just this simple, but I would say that a good 80% of the pushback that you get from him is because his anxiety has been raised or he's feeling criticized. I know it's not that simple, but if you reflect back of all the times that he has given you some grief to one degree or another, the vast majority of the time it's either because his anxiety was up or he downloaded your delivery such that he felt criticized. His self-esteem is already in the toilet. It doesn't take much for him to feel criticized. Sometimes your neutral comments download to him as criticism. You're not necessarily being critical or doing anything wrong, but he's going to download it in a certain way because he's hypersensitive. Hypersensitive. If you can keep his anxiety reduced, you're never going to eliminate it. And if you can be careful with your wording and timing with respect to your message delivery, you will cut your workload greatly and you will cut your grief greatly. Just think of ASD as a disorder of social skills and emotional intelligence. The two things that come with the territory that I want to talk about in this minute is mind blindness and emotions blindness. So if I have ASD level 1, I'm going to be blind to, in this case, my NT wife's perspectives, her thoughts, her motives, her opinions. I'm going to be blind to that. I'm also going to be blind to her feelings. And even if she tells me how she feels, it doesn't help my sight. So here's where it gets weird. Because if he doesn't if you're not thinking the way that he is thinking on the issue in question, and if you're not feeling the way he's feeling on the issue in question, he, at an unconscious level, downloads that as she's disagreeing with me. We're not on the same page thought-wise and feeling-wise, therefore she is disagreeing with me. The next thinking error, because she's disagreeing with me, therefore she is against me. This is exactly how his brain works. It gets worse than this. Because she's against me, I must get defensive and prove that I'm right. Because in his mind blindness and emotions blindness, only one person can be right. And it has to be me because my opinion, my feelings are the only ones I can see. So since only one person can be right, and since my opinion is the only opinion that I understand, therefore her opinion, her logic, her feelings are invalid. I want to repeat this again in summary. Here's the steps. I don't know how many steps there are, 5 or 6 in there. I have ASD level 1. Therefore, I'm going to have some mind blindness and emotions blindness. Therefore, when she doesn't think the same way I do on a particular thing, or doesn't feel the same way that I do about a particular thing, therefore she's disagreeing with me. Therefore, she's against me. Therefore, I have to defend myself because I know only one person can be right. I don't see gray areas. I don't realize that there's often 2 truths. So since I can only see my logic and my feelings, therefore her logic and her feelings are invalid. And you download, and why wouldn't you, as he doesn't care about my opinions. My thoughts on the matter doesn't matter. He doesn't care about my feelings. No, he doesn't see your perspective. It's not like he sees your perspective and he understands it, but he totally rejects it. It's not that he sees your feelings and understands your feelings but doesn't care. That's not what's going on. You have to see something and then you have to understand what you're seeing and then you have to decide to reject it. He doesn't see it. He doesn't get to step 2 or 3. Do you have any suggestions for turning an ASD strength into a relationship strength? They seem to be mutually exclusive. Well, yeah, they can seem to be. That's a good question. There are some strengths that you will have that the neurotypicals won't have. And also with respect to, and you use the term relationship strength, just understand that that's going to be a relationship strength is going to be only assessed in the eye of the beholder. So you may exhibit a relationship strength that you have, and this person might really value that and be impressed by that. And you may exhibit the same strength to somebody else, and they may not even view it as a strength. It may not impress them at all. It may not establish any kind of meaningful connection for them. So that's going to be very relative as point number one. Maybe a good angle to come at would be to contrast your strengths with the typical neurotypical. The typical neurotypical. They often will fail to notice what's in front of their eyes because they're distracted by social cues, which you don't tend to pay attention to. They're distracted by random small chit chat, which you don't engage in. You are very good at tuning in to specific details. And you have a much better memory with respect to details than neurotypicals tend to have. If you've ever joined a group or a club or whatever just to fit in, right? You're joining a particular club just to fit in. You know how hard it is to be true to yourself when you're trying to fit in. People on the autism spectrum, they tend to view social expectations as rather irrelevant. Their interest and their passions are really what matters, not so much other people's expectations. And there again, this is relative. Some people would view that as a weakness. Some people would view it as a strength. And it can be both, depending on the situation. You will not tend to be too concerned about outward appearances. That's very much unlike your neurotypical friends. You're not going to be too worried about brand names of clothes, hairstyles, and so on. They will. Everybody claims to value the truth, but few people, and I'm specifically referring to neurotypicals, are truly truthful. They think they are, and they try to be, and they say they are when they're not. Most people on the autism spectrum, the truth is the truth. There's no shades of gray. It either the truth or it is not the truth. So usually a good word from somebody with supposed ASD level 1 is the real deal. That's a relationship strength as far as I'm concerned. People on the autism spectrum, they don't play head games. They typically don't have ulterior motives. And they assume, actually they're a little gullible because they assume that their spouse won't play head games either. Oh, she does. She does. And you don't catch it when it happens, but she does. So that's a refreshing change from the emotional roller coaster that damages many neurodiverse relationships. I could go on the rest of the afternoon. You know, the typical guy on the autism spectrum is not concerned who's richer, who's smarter, who's more talented, who's prettier, who's more handsome. You know, for people on the spectrum, these distinctions don't really hold much importance. For neurotypicals, it does. So you will tend to see through such surface appearances to discover the real person underneath. Neurotypicals tend not to do that, on average. One might be emotional reasoning. This is where the person makes decisions and arguments based on how he feels rather than objective reality. I'm a big believer in using emotions as your gauge, but you need to use emotions as your gauge in combination with rational thought. So in the event that the ASD guy is totally operating on logic, that's dangerous. And you have run into many cases where your NT wife operates totally on emotions, that's equally as dangerous. So one of the things that I do when I start using emotional reasoning, because it feels this way, therefore it is this way, I go, wait a minute, no. What's the logic behind there? What's the reality that's going on? And I do this daily. I will do this daily in the moment when I'm starting to let my emotions dominate, or I'm operating on 99% emotions, 1% logic. I quickly go back and go, okay, what's really going on here? And what I do is I try to put myself in the other person's shoes and look at it from their angle. And when I do that, I realize, okay, I probably was making too much out of this. That's one of my favorite self-talk phrases right there. I'm probably making too much out of this. Another favorite phrase of mine, a go-to phrase when I'm trying to erase the distortion is, I think I'll just mind my own business instead of trying to predict other people's motives. That's a big one with me too. This is not going to be much consolation for her to hear what I'm getting ready to tell you, but it is the truth. But in the early going, they want to accuse you of masking. Oh, it was all a fake job. You were a great con man. It was all pretend. No.
I heard that.
No, it was not pretend. He was not faking it. She was his special interest, maybe not the number one special interest. She was way up there in the top one or two of his special interest at that time. Everything that he said or did, all the affection, sex, compassion, grace, mercy, etc., emotional reciprocity, give and take in conversation, all of it was very authentic. Once the romantic phase ends and the settling in phase begins, where we're just back to the mundane, routine, day-to-day living again, and I still love her, I still value the marriage, but the romance phase is over. That's when he kind of, her being his special interest, it kind of declines. And now he spends more of his time with his true special interest. Also, the relationship gets more complicated. In the early going of the relationship, like I mentioned to you at the top of the call, this lady that, well, when we were first dating, we'd go over there and get ice cream. In the early going, it's all fun and games and play. Once you get married and have kids and now have to work and pay the bills, it gets real complicated. And if you have ASD level 1, you're going to have some mind blindness and emotions blindness, and it's going to be hard to fire on all 8 cylinders if you don't have 8 cylinders. She's firing on 8. She's very intuitive. Her social and emotional intelligence is way up here. Her social and emotional skills and needs are also way up here. His are not. He does not have the same degree of emotional and social skills and needs as she does. And so that's a turnoff to her. And she thinks, well, you've kind of abandoned me. That's her download. You have abandoned me. You are emotionally unavailable. It's like living with a hologram. Well, that's very insulting. And that, by the way, that's her download. So your love hasn't diminished. Your respect for her as a person has not diminished. Your valuing the marriage has not diminished. What has diminished is your interest level in having high levels of emotional reciprocity and connection and give and take in conversation, and even sometimes sex kind of wanes after the years. So she takes, because he's doing these things that create distance, that's her download. You're not creating distance, she's perceiving distance. Because I'm downloading these behaviors in him as creating distance, therefore he doesn't love me, therefore I'm not important to him, therefore he doesn't really care about me, doesn't value the marriage, the work is more important to him than me. And these are all her downloads. But that's secondarily your problem too, because now she's going to accuse you of being insensitive, uncaring, selfish, narcissistic, sociopathic. So that's the answer, that's the truth. And as I mentioned before I even went into that monologue, that's really not going to help her much, because she's still going to think, okay, well, I understand cognitively what's going on there, but it doesn't help me emotionally. Well, you want me to lie? You want me to concoct some kind of sugar-coated thing to make you feel better? Or do you want the truth? I can either lie and make up some bullshit to make you feel better, or I can do the better option and just be totally honest with you about what's going on. And doing this for a number of years, that's usually what goes on with him. And I want to emphasize again, his love for her hasn't decreased. His respect for her hasn't decreased. His valuing the marriage hasn't decreased. One thing that has increased is her pushing for that original connection, which you distance even more from that. Her message raises your anxiety. And as an anxiety reduction strategy, you kind of pull away. She pursues, you pull away. She pursues, you pull away. And then she views this as abandonment. And then if this goes on for too long, she stops pursuing. And then worst case scenario, the two of you do become just roommates at that point and don't even try to work on anything anymore. But hopefully you'll intervene earlier down the road, and you're here, and you can let her listen to what I just said. Mm-hmm. The neurodiverse marriage has got so destructive, and it's understandable. The two of you are wired almost 180 degrees in opposite directions. Since it's so hard to make a connection when you're on opposite ends of the spectrum. This, I know I'm preaching to the choir at this point, this marriage has been super stressful. And both parties, I'm talking about him and you, I'm not just picking on you, he's just as guilty. Both of you have adopted a victim mentality. When both parties do that, your amygdala now is on high alert. Both parties are at an unconscious level scanning for bad news. I'll use you as the example. What's he going to say next that's going to hurt? What's he going to do next that makes me feel like I'm not important? What next thing that I need him to do is he not going to follow through with? And he does his own version of that with different things to you too. So now both parties are scanning for bad news. They're just kind of expecting it. And they're waiting for the other shoe to drop, which now you've set up a self-fulfilling prophecy, because as soon as you start scanning for the next bad thing that's going to happen, you find it quickly. And you will over-focus on it. And then when it happens, you will overreact to it. And then you will turn it into a memory, an emotional memory and a content memory. Think of something disastrous that happened with him that really hurt your feelings bad. You have the content memory, you remember what was said and done in that moment, but you also have an emotional memory. So every time you replay that event that was really hurtful, you also replay the emotions that you felt at that time. And even though that specific event only happened once, when you keep replaying that movie, it feels like it's happened 100 times. And this sensitizes your brain to negativity in the fullest sense of the term. You've heard the brain is plastic. You know, the brain has this thing called plasticity. You're literally rewiring your brain to recognize, focus, and react to the negativity at a scale much higher than what you originally did in the first year of marriage, for example. And then if that wasn't bad enough, both parties will tend to unintentionally ignore the positive. They can't see your husband is doing something right, but you're blinded to he could be doing something right, but you can't even see it now. And he does the same thing with you. And as you know, if party A is negative, it brings out negativity in party B. And now party B then reinforces more negativity in party A, and you bounce back and forth and you get this synergy, this exponential effect where 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, 1 + 1 equals 5, all of which it reinforces your need to scan for even more bad news. It reinforces your amygdala to be on even higher alert. And if this goes on for very long, guess who gets sicker? Who? Because you need to connect and process things and debrief in order to get your cortisol level down. He's over there de-escalating and decompressing by hyper-focusing on his special interests for extended periods of time. He always gets relief. And you never get relief. That's why she's the one that's always complaining about depression and fibromyalgia and rheumatoid arthritis and autoimmune disease and numerous other things, because she never gets off of the cortisol hot plate. And this doesn't make you feel any better, I understand that, but I want you to know what the hell's going on. At the very least, maybe you will take some of these things less personally and realize, okay, well, he did that shit again, but I'm pretty sure based on what I know now, that was a trait. I don't think there was a malicious intent. I don't even think he knew what the hell he was doing. He didn't even know what's going on half the time. So not only was there not any malicious intent, he was totally absent. His behavior and the consequences of his behavior and how it impacts me doesn't even register in one brain cell. It was not premeditated at all.
I get a lot of NT wives that say, well, when we first started dating, my yet-to-be husband just did a lot of masking and presented himself as someone other than who he really was. And it was kind of deceitful. But I can promise you that your now ASD husband, never had the thought of, well, I really like this girl, I want to date her, and I'm going to be deceitful and present myself as being somebody else, and then when I get comfortable with her and have her trapped, I'll just go back to my old way of behaving. Masking is not manipulation, rather it is a cover-up for shame, specifically a cover-up for toxic shame and toxic guilt. Healthy guilt is, I did something wrong, I didn't necessarily mean to do it, but now in retrospect I see it was hurtful. I want to learn from this mistake. I intend not to repeat this mistake. I'm going to make amends and move forward. Toxic guilt, though, is I'm always making these social mistakes. I'm always hurting her. I'm always letting her down. I never seem to get it right. Doesn't matter what I say or do, it's never good enough. This in turn leads to toxic shame, which is because I'm always making these mistakes repeatedly and can never seem to learn from my mistakes. Therefore, I am a mistake. And so his social awkwardness becomes an identity. And he's embarrassed by that. And he purposely tries to hide that out of a sense of shame. In other words, he's thinking, if people knew who I really was, they wouldn't like me, I wouldn't be lovable, I wouldn't be acceptable, I would live the rest of my life alone. In other words, I can't really let my true colors show, because if I do, I will be rejected, ostracized, maybe even teased and bullied. I will never measure up. I'll never have what it takes to make it in the social world. So this so-called masking is a shame cover-up, not a manipulation, although I admit that from the NT female brain perspective, it certainly seems as if it's a manipulation. And he's a con man of sorts. And the reason that he changes his colors once the relationship has some mileage on it is because he's comfortable now with his NT partner. He lets down his guard because he feels that finally it's okay just to be myself. But unfortunately, after years of being chastised and reprimanded, which is how he would view it, he realizes yet again, I can't really truly relax and just be me. So this defensiveness that you see in him and these neutral comments or constructive criticisms that he downloads as an attack are the direct result of toxic shame. Feelings of not being good enough, yet again being reprimanded, looked down on, and told in no uncertain terms that he's not good enough. So what I do instead, I disconnect from people because they rarely accept me, and I connect with my special interest because it always accepts me.
My question is as follows. Is there enough evidence to describe a specific pattern of deterioration of a marriage in which the woman is suffering from Asperger, whether diagnosed or not, and typically not, and the male is neurotypical? I'm specifically wondering whether the continuous masking of the Asperger woman and the need to take the mask off from time to time in the most convenient place at home, as well as her frequent anxiety, create a pattern in which the neurotypical man, who is typically unaware of the Asperger, responds negatively to lack of empathy and the feeling that he and or the kids come only second after her work or a special interest, which unavoidably create distance between the couple. And quite paradoxically, the Asperger woman blames the neurotypical man for being distant, small-minded, and maybe oversensitive as a cause for all of their marriage problems. Thank you very much in advance. Thanks.
Okay, well, thanks for the question. As far as evidence for a specific pattern that you described, I don't know of any actual research that would contain all of those elements, but there's definitely anecdotal evidence and reports that what you described, which is multifactorial, by the way, definitely occurs in many ASD plus NT relationships. Now, you mentioned masking, and especially doing the masking at home. And so what goes on there, especially with female on the autism spectrum, is I don't necessarily use the term masking. I use the term mimicry. So if we'll use your wife as the example, if she's at work, what typically happens is the ASD individual is not sure exactly how to act socially. And From a very young age, they've learned how to copy the behavior of others, and so they get mimicry down to a science. That's what I guess you're referring to as masking. And so when you act as if you are typical all day long, that's exhausting. And it's also involves a lot of denying the self and faking being somebody else. Constantly observing others, constantly on alert to, oh, did I say something wrong, or am I doing something wrong, or how should I behave in this meeting, or what do I need to say to that coworker? So that is very exhausting and anxiety provoking. And so when she gets home at the end of a long day of doing that, she does need to decompress. And unfortunately, what happens when the ASD spouse who mimics throughout the day comes home, the NT spouse is often the target of anxiety reduction. Now, I do want to deviate from the question here just a little bit and make the distinction between mimicry and masking. Masking suggests that the individual is purposely trying to be deceitful and trying to hide something that is perhaps malicious, whereas mimicry suggests trying to fit in. Masking is deceitful. Mimicry is trying to fit in. Masking is trying to exclude something. Mimicry is trying to include something. So in this case, the ASD spouse feels very comfortable being her true self in front of the individual, the significant other in her life. She feels very comfortable being her true self in front of him. And so tolerance is probably low. Need to decompress, isolate is probably very high. Any type of sensory sensitivities or additional overload in the evening times with family will be met with some version of shutdown or meltdown. And then, of course, the NT spouse is going to respond defensively, which exacerbates the situation. It's also typical for the ASD spouse to have a special interest. And I think what you've described in your question is, in this case, the special interest is work. And it's not that she doesn't care about you or the kids, but she spends most of her energy with work and has very little left over. And it's not that she lacks empathy, it's that she doesn't display empathy in the way that is meaningful to perhaps you or the kids. It's also not uncommon for the occurrence of the ASD spouse being somewhat non-empathic, we will say, and being more absorbed in her special interest or work. And then the other family members feel like they're not important. They feel like the ASD spouse is being selfish, insensitive, uncaring, perhaps even narcissistic, and they may angrily and justifiably blame the ASD spouse for not really truly connecting and being present and showing validation, empathy, emotional reciprocity, and so on. But due to the ASD spouse's mind blindness and alexithymia and some executive function deficits, these pleas from the NT for connection download in the ASD brain as criticism. So what you've described is a sequence that contains certain elements that are quite common. It's more common in the role reversal situation where it's the ASD male and the NT female, but it certainly can occur in the way that you described. So the question then becomes, how can the NT spouse voice, in this case, his concerns about a disconnection and a feeling like comes second compared to work? How can he voice his concerns about that in a way that doesn't download as criticism in the ASD wife's brain? And therein lies the dilemma. A communication strategy would need to take into account those two things. You know, people on the autism spectrum often get blamed for masking, but neurotypicals mask too. Yes, even neurotypicals want to fit in. They want to be accepted. They want to present well. They want to put their best foot forward. How many of you neurotypicals listening to this video are one of those people that has as their mantra, I'll do anything to keep the peace? How many of you neurotypicals out there listening to this video are codependent? That's masking. Masking is a two-way street. It's a normal thing to do to avoid being rejected, ostracized, teased, and even bullied. He knows that he sucks at social skills because he probably learned that as a child. And so if you were a little kid
and your parents signed you up for Little League or T-ball or whatever, and you just didn't have the knack for that, and you got benched, you just basically sucked. So you ended up kind of being the bat boy, and it was a terrible experience. I'm never playing baseball again. I suck at that. I was never any good at it. They started me way out in the outfield, and then the coach wasn't even happy with me way out there, and he just benched me, and I just sat on the bench the entire season. So now that I have been benched by the coach, and I know that I'm not a good baseball player, and then somebody comes along and says, oh, well, would you like to join this team and learn how to play baseball? It's like, no, I've already been around that block. I suck at it. No, I don't have any interest in learning baseball or learning how to be a better pitcher or a better batter. And I'm perfectly fine not playing baseball. And so that's exactly what's going on with your husband, is that he knows he's terrible at it. He's had a bad experience with it. And talking is a social activity. Of course he doesn't want to talk. And it's a shame that he feels that way, because social skills can be taught. And the give and take in conversation can be taught. And he would actually get to the point where he probably enjoy conversing and enjoy talking, because he's actually doing it fairly adeptly for the first time in his life. So he might even find some joy in having conversation about something other than his topic of interest.
I get a lot of NT wives that say, well, when we first started dating, my yet-to-be husband just did a lot of masking and presented himself as someone other than who he really was. And it was kind of deceitful. But I can promise you that your now ASD husband never had the thought of, well, I really like this girl, I want to date her, and I'm going to be deceitful and present myself as being somebody else, and then when I get comfortable with her and have her trapped, I'll just go back to my old way of behaving. Masking is not manipulation, rather it is a cover-up for shame, specifically a cover-up for toxic shame and toxic guilt. Healthy guilt is, I did something wrong, I didn't necessarily mean to do it, but now in retrospect I see it was hurtful. I want to learn from this mistake. I intend not to repeat this mistake. I'm going to make amends and move forward. Toxic guilt, though, is I'm always making these social mistakes. I'm always hurting her. I'm always letting her down. I never seem to get it right. Doesn't matter what I say or do, it's never good enough. This in turn leads to toxic shame, which is because I'm always making these mistakes repeatedly and can never seem to learn from my mistakes. Therefore, I am a mistake. And so his social awkwardness becomes an identity. And he's embarrassed by that. And he purposely tries to hide that out of a sense of shame. In other words, he's thinking, if people knew who I really was, they wouldn't like me, I wouldn't be lovable, I wouldn't be acceptable, I would live the rest of my life alone. In other words, I can't really let my true colors show, because if I do, I will be rejected, ostracized, maybe even teased and bullied. I will never measure up. I'll never have what it takes to make it in the social world. So this so-called masking is a shame cover-up, not a manipulation, although I admit that from the NT female brain perspective, it certainly seems as if it's a manipulation. And he's a con man of sorts. And the reason that he changes his colors once the relationship has some mileage on it is because he's comfortable now with his NT partner. He lets down his guard because he feels that finally it's okay just to be myself. But unfortunately, after years of being chastised and reprimanded, which is how he would view it, he realizes yet again, I can't really truly relax and just be me. So this defensiveness that you see in him and these neutral comments or constructive criticisms that he downloads as an attack are the direct result of toxic shame. Feelings of not being good enough, yet again being reprimanded, looked down on, and told in no uncertain terms that he's not good enough. So what I do instead, I disconnect from people because they rarely accept me, and I connect with my special interest because it always accepts me.
I'm a big believer in facing the truth. I would rather be hurt by the truth than blinded by bullshit. I've always been that way. And I had an NT wife email me today, Well, you could use neurodiverse instead of autism spectrum disorder because, so these guys are sensitive, and I think that my husband is real sensitive, and he doesn't want to, admit that he might have this disorder. And so you've heard of this term, right? Neurodiverse, and it's a politically correct term, and it would, be a little more sensitive. So duly noted, but I don't think you guys are that fragile that I have to be. I'm not really into being politically correct. Plus, I use neurodiversity to describe the couples. When I say neurodiverse couples, I mean one has autism, one does not. So the reason I'm not willing to use neurodiverse for you guys is because there's no shame involved. To use neurodiverse to kind of sugarcoat it a little bit implies that there's something to be ashamed of. No. Period. ASD level 1 is what we're referring to now. There's 2 other levels. It has to do with levels of functioning. You're already aware of that. You guys are all ASD level 1, which is high functioning. So think of ASD level 1 as simply I don't like the term disorder, though, I will tell you that. Because there again, that sounds like there's something wrong or bad or to be ashamed of. So I do not like the term disorder. So I guess I do want to be politically correct on that. I prefer to call it a condition or a different way of thinking because I think that's more in alignment with the reality of things. And you could think of it as a condition of social skills being low, social needs being low, logic being high. And that's kind of your saving grace. That is your strength, your logic. We wouldn't have this computer we're talking on right now if we didn't have somebody on the autism spectrum, Asperger's syndrome, and back in that day, Bill Gates. The engineering field is full of people on the spectrum. Computer sciences, they're all over the place. It's almost a stretch to call you guys in the minority because there's so many undiagnosed people crawling around all over the planet. If we could get to the bottom of things, we might find that 30% or 40% of people, the entire people on the planet, are on the spectrum. That sounds like a bizarre exaggeration. It's not, because there's a lot of people that have these traits, but nobody has put 2 and 2 together yet or done some research and thought, hey, maybe you have this thing called ASD level 1. They just go on with life and they don't even entertain the idea. So there's more people that have it than have been diagnosed with it or that even have talked about it.
Autism spectrum disorder comes with anxiety by default, and whenever there's anxiety, moodiness and mild depression is not far behind. And I just call this moodiness a blue mood, and it's used to describe a mild form of depression, but one that is chronic, in other words, lingering throughout the lifespan. So for the person with autism spectrum disorder, this blue mood often begins in adolescence due to his or her lack of social skills and inability to fit in with the peer group, being criticized, teased, bullied, and ostracized, all of which usually result in low self-esteem and a preference for social isolation. In other words, preferring to be by oneself since trying to fit in with others is too painful. Ridicule and rejection often takes its toll over the years, resulting in not only a pervasive blue mood, but also an element of paranoia. In other words, he or she is so used to being mistreated emotionally and or verbally that he comes to expect it. So being highly suspicious of others, preparing for an attack of some kind, and jumping to defensiveness very quickly is not uncommon in adults on the autism spectrum. Oftentimes, the autistic adult's paranoid tendencies result in a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, their expectation of ridicule and rejection leads them to say or do something that provokes the very negative response from the other person that they so dread. For example, in anticipation of a critical comment, the person with ASD may deliver one first, inciting the other person to return the criticism. This, in turn, convinces the person that others are indeed out to get him. Unfortunately, many people with ASD not only had to endure various forms of social stress throughout the school years, they now experience much of the same at home and at their place of employment. As adults, people with this blue mood, they tend to take life too seriously. They tend to take others' comments and behavior too personally. In fact, many of those that I've worked with are unable to remember a time when they actually felt happy, enthusiastic, and motivated. They often report feeling as though they have been in a one-down position their entire life. So as a result, they can be somewhat irritable, gloomy, and negative much of the time, usually expecting the worst possible outcome when uncomfortable challenges and struggles arise. They will tend to be inactive and withdrawn, worry frequently, and are very critical of themselves as well. Most have a hard time enjoying things and having fun unless it's a solitary activity, usually one that involves their special interest. If the adult on the autism spectrum finally seeks treatment, it's not uncommon that he or she has had this problem for many years. Because a blue mood tends to develop in adolescence, the autistic individual may believe that it's normal to always feel this way. He doesn't realize that the quality of his mood is anything out of the ordinary. So it often goes unnoticed and therefore untreated. So if you wonder why your ASD spouse is so sensitive to criticism and may even view your neutral comments as criticism, you can bet that this whole thing started in childhood. He was disapproved of decades ago. He hasn't recovered from that, and current disapprovals today will cause flashbacks to the past, and he will instantly be defensive.
They turn their emotions way down, not completely off, of course, and they do have empathy and they can empathize. They don't have displayed empathy much, certainly not to the degree that you want, but of course they have empathy. They're not an automaton or a robot. And the reason that they turn their emotions way down is because, honestly, since they're almost overly logical and very task-oriented, tasks of a non-social emotional nature, they purposely turn their emotions way down for two reasons. And I am speaking in generalizations. This is not a one-size-fits-everybody, but this is a good 80% of the time this is what goes on. Turn the emotions way down because they don't say this, they don't even know they necessarily think this way, but it comes from many years of emotions getting in the way of their logical thinking and their task orientation. It's not that they have no room for emotions. Honestly, they just don't see any need for emotions in their mind. They might say, if they were honest with themselves, emotions just get in the way of completing tasks, and their motto might even be remove emotions and accomplish the task more efficiently. And that goes very much against the grain of, in this case, the NT female brain. So that's one of the things that goes on with respect to turning the emotions way down, is it gets in the way of their logic and of completing non-social emotional tasks. The other reason they've turned their emotions way down is because in many cases, it'd be interesting for you to ask your husband about this later today. A lot of times they knew something was off. Maybe they were labeled a problem child by parents, maybe a problem student by teachers, tried to fit in with peers. Oftentimes were ostracized, rejected, bullied, teased. And they came to the conclusion at some point at a very young age that they just can't do the social game. They're no good at it. And so they have kind of gravitated towards a special interest that has nothing to do with people. So that's another reason that they have kind of shut their emotions off. They've learned to kind of be a solo player. And I probably should mention a third one, although this is definitely the minority of cases. Some of the time, in this case, the little boy with autism was actually an empath, believe it or not. And this is the minority of cases, but there are some cases where he was an empath, but he also had high anxiety, and it was too anxiety producing for him to feel other people's feelings. It was too hard for him emotionally. Somebody who already had anxiety, it was too painful to feel other people's pain. And so he learned, probably at an unconscious level, to stop feeling because it was just too painful to feel other people's pain. I call this the paramedic effect. You can't be a good paramedic and be an empath, dealing with blood, gore, dead babies, Lord only knows what throughout the day. You can't be an empath and be a good soldier in times of war. And honestly, with autism and all the traits that we talked about last week, mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, anxiety, sensory sensitivities, weak central coherence, problems with prediction, and so on, it's hard to go through life as an autistic individual and also be an empath. So they're kind of incompatible. This is not going to be much consolation for her to hear what I'm getting ready to tell you, but it is the truth. But in the early going, they want to accuse you of masking. Oh, it was all a fake job. You were a great con man. It was all pretend. No.
I heard that.
No, it was not pretend. He was not faking it. She was his special interest, maybe not the number one special interest. She was way up there in the top one or two of his special interest at that time. Everything that he said or did, all the affection, sex, compassion, grace, mercy, etc., emotional reciprocity, give and take in conversation, all of it was very authentic. Once the romantic phase ends and the settling in phase begins, where we're just back to the mundane, routine, day-to-day living again, and I still love her, I still value the marriage, but the romance phase is over. That's when he kind of, her being his special interest, it kind of declines. And now he spends more of his time with his true special interest. Also, the relationship gets more complicated. In the early going of the relationship, like I mentioned to you at the top of the call, this lady that, well, when we were first dating, we'd go over there and get ice cream. In the early going, it's all fun and games and play. Once you get married and have kids and now have to work and pay the bills, it gets real complicated. And if you have ASD level 1, you're going to have some mind blindness and emotions blindness, and it's going to be hard to fire on all 8 cylinders if you don't have 8 cylinders. She's firing on 8. She's very intuitive. Her social and emotional intelligence is way up here. Her social and emotional skills and needs are also way up here. His are not. He does not have the same degree of emotional and social skills and needs as she does. And so that's a turnoff to her. And she thinks, well, you've kind of abandoned me. That's her download. You have abandoned me. You are emotionally unavailable. It's like living with a hologram. Well, that's very insulting. And that, by the way, that's her download. So your love hasn't diminished. Your respect for her as a person has not diminished. Your valuing the marriage has not diminished. What has diminished is your interest level in having high levels of emotional reciprocity and connection and give and take in conversation, and even sometimes sex kind of wanes after the years. So she takes, because he's doing these things that create distance, that's her download. You're not creating distance, she's perceiving distance. Because I'm downloading these behaviors in him as creating distance, therefore he doesn't love me, therefore I'm not important to him, therefore he doesn't really care about me, doesn't value the marriage, the work is more important to him than me. And these are all her downloads. But that's secondarily your problem too, because now she's going to accuse you of being insensitive, uncaring, selfish, narcissistic, sociopathic. So that's the answer, that's the truth. And as I mentioned before I even went into that monologue, that's really not going to help her much, because she's still going to think, okay, well, I understand cognitively what's going on there, but it doesn't help me emotionally. Well, do you want me to lie? You want me to concoct some kind of sugar-coated thing to make you feel better? Or do you want the truth? I can either lie and make up some bullshit to make you feel better, or I can do the better option and just be totally honest with you about what's going on. And doing this for a number of years, that's usually what goes on with him. And I want to emphasize again, his love for her hasn't decreased. His respect for her hasn't decreased. His valuing the marriage hasn't decreased. One thing that has increased is her pushing for that original connection, which you distance even more from that. Her message raises your anxiety, and as an anxiety reduction strategy, you kind of pull away. She pursues, you pull away. She pursues, you pull away. And then she views this as abandonment. And then if this goes on for too long, she stops pursuing. And then worst case scenario, the two of you do become just roommates at that point and don't even try to work on anything anymore. But hopefully you'll intervene earlier down the road, and you're here, and you can let her listen to what I just said. Mm-hmm. She's wanting to connect with you, and you're more wanting to connect with your special interest, we will say. So in the early going of the relationship, it's very possible that she was your special interest. That happens in many cases. And so she got the indication in the early going of the relationship, hey, he seems like a nice guy. I get empathy. I get emotional reciprocity. I get intimacy. I get sex. He seems like a good guy. And then when the newness of that relationship kind of wears off, typically he will gravitate back towards his original special interest, especially when the relationship gets messy. And I use terms a lot that I hear from the guys. And that term gets used a lot, messy. When we were dating, things were fun. We just went out to eat. We went out to drink, whatever. It was fun and games, and it was okay. But then I had to meet her parents. Then when we got married, then we had kids, and I have financial responsibility. And so as the relationship grew, which it's supposed to grow, of course, it got complicated. And the social and emotional aspects became replete. And at some level, you maybe kind of got over your head because when you kind of disconnected, she noticed that, and her being a team player and being very social, she'd try to get you to come back into the intimacy that you may have had in the early going of the relationship, but her message sucked. Her complaining and anger, her heart was in the right spot. She was doing the best that she knew how to do at the time. But her method of trying to pull you back in and get that intimacy and emotional reciprocity back raised your anxiety. So instead of getting you back in connected, your tendency was to pull away. So she kind of got the opposite of what she wanted. Hey, this is going to be a real startling thing to hear. I don't think you're doing anything wrong there. She's not going to want to hear that. By the way, you didn't trick anybody. You're not a magician. She's giving you way more credit for having skills up your sleeve than you have. Now, you did present differently in the early going of the relationship than you did later for reasons that I just stated a little bit ago. Even neurotypical people do that. So what's up with, this is my assessment, is that when it comes to, business and formal relationships, you do a good job, and I'm not going to use the term masking. You do a good job of putting on your best face, being on your best behavior. Mm-hmm. But then when you're with your wife and close friends, this is why I say this part here is there's nothing wrong with this. When you have close friends and with your wife, you feel comfortable with them. You don't need to feel like I got to put on this front. So you finally relax and be yourself around them. So when they say, well, when I first met you, you were this way and now you're this other way, it's because the first time you met me, I was trying to put on a good front. And now that I'm kind of more relaxed and feel safe in this relationship, I'm just willing to be myself. I don't see anything wrong with either ends of that spectrum. It might create a problem for you because maybe when you let your true colors show, some people don't like those colors. Sure. Those are the people you can avoid. You're the same person now that as you were then. So that's point number one. Point number two is when she says, well, you're only good for socializing for a limited amount of time, you're goddamn right. What's the big surprise? If he has low social and emotional intelligence, he's going to have low social and emotional skills. And he's going to have, listen, he's going to have low social and emotional needs. He can go all year without talking about feelings. And he can meet your needs without knowing how you feel. And if you want to speak French about how you feel, and he's supposed to know what he's supposed to do based on how you feel, do yourself a favor, go beat your head against a brick wall, because it'll be a lot less painful and you'll get more accomplished. So just because he has a short social span of time and doesn't understand feelings doesn't mean that he doesn't care about you, doesn't mean that he can't meet your needs. So that's for her and any of the other NTs that want to watch this video.
Would you like to schedule a paid private coaching session? This will be in the form of a face-to-face Zoom call. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this Calendly link. If you click on that link, it'll open up my calendar. You can pick the available days and times that works for your schedule. You'll get a follow-up email immediately after purchasing a session that will have the Zoom link that coincides with the day and time that you picked. I will get an email too that you scheduled a session, and I will be available on that exact day and time, and we will talk. I look forward to working with you.